He vanished as Berlin burned. The man who controlled access to Hitler, who held the keys to the inner party machine, simply disappeared into the chaos of the Third Reich's last hours. What happened to Martin Bormann, and why did his fate become one of the most persistent mysteries of the post-war era? Martin Bormann mattered because he was not a battlefield commander or a frontline ideologue in the public eye. He was an administrator of power. As head of the Nazi Party Chancellery, and in the later years as Hitler's private secretary and chief of the Führer's staff, Bormann controlled appointments, information flow, and the daily life of the Führer's circle. His office bridged the Nazi Party and the state. His influence was exercised through paperwork, access, and the relentless management of patronage. That combination, centrality and invisibility, made him uniquely consequential and, in defeat, uniquely interesting. If he could slip away, could other architects of the regime do the same? If this question is speaking to you and you want deeper WE2 investigations, subscribe and hit the bell. We'll follow the evidence as closely as the archives allow. To understand the mystery, we need a concise timeline of what is known, what was reported, and where the record breaks down. The story divides naturally into phases: his rise and position of power, his last confirmed presence in the Führer bunker, the chaotic escape attempts from central Berlin, the cascade of international sightings and rumors, official and private investigations, the later discovery and forensic claims, and finally the legal and symbolic closure, or lack of it. A brief profile. Martin Bormann was born in 1900 and climbed the party ladder through administrative and organizational roles in the 1920s and 1930s. By the war years, he had become a gatekeeper for Hitler. He was indispensable to the internal functioning of the regime. This is not a portrait of charisma so much as of relentless bureaucratic competence wielded in service of violent criminal policy. His power was institutional, and that institutional role explains why the Allies and later prosecutors treated his disappearance as more than a curiosity. It mattered to the record of responsibility. The last confirmed records place Bormann in Berlin in late April 1945. Hitler had been confined to the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. The Soviet armies were encircling the city. Witnesses reported meetings, last directives, and hurried attempts by senior Nazis to escape the encirclement. Many of these testimonies come from surviving bunker occupants, who later gave depositions to Allied investigators and post-war trials. These depositions established that Bormann remained in the complex until the final days, helping coordinate orders and maintaining links with units outside the bunker. The precise hour of his final confirmed sighting is a matter for primary documentation. Contemporary depositions and wartime diaries are the sources to consult for exact timestamps. Source required: primary bunker witness depositions, diaries, NARA, BA file references. The narratives about Bormann's departure from Berlin begin with the breakout attempts that took place as Soviet troops closed in. On 1 to 2 May 1945, small groups of remaining defenders and staff tried to fight or slip through Soviet lines. It is reported, and widely repeated, that Bormann joined one of these groups attempting to flee to the west. Several witnesses later described seeing him in civilian clothes near the government quarter, trying to make his way out. Those accounts form the core of the claim that he did not die in the bunker, but attempted to escape the city. Yet important caveats apply. Witness testimonies collected months or years later can be fragmentary and contradictory. The fog of total defeat makes each account hard to verify in isolation. We must treat these as reported observations, potentially accurate but not decisive on their own. Label: reported, unconfirmed, verify via primary sources. From there, competing theories multiplied. One line of claim said Bormann was killed during the breakout in May 1945, perhaps shot while trying to cross a railway line or in hand-to-hand fighting in the suburbs. Another claimed he successfully escaped Berlin entirely, making his way through shattered Germany into Czechoslovakia or to Denmark, or by train routes to southern Europe. More dramatic versions alleged long transits via neutral Spain to Argentina, the familiar post-war escape narrative associated with many Nazi fugitives. These alleged routes and destinations circulated in intelligence reports, newspaper dispatches, émigré testimony, and, later, in conspiracy literature. It is crucial to parse these claims carefully. There are three categories that recur in the record. 1. Last-moment eyewitness reports inside Berlin and its outskirts. 2. Wartime and immediate post-war intelligence reports suggesting movement beyond Germany. And 3. Later sightings and rumors, often decades later, claiming Bormann's presence in South America or elsewhere. The evidentiary weight decreases as you move from Category 1 to Category 3. Immediate wartime reports and depositions are potentially more reliable because they were recorded closer to the events, while decades later, anecdotal sightings are prone to misidentification and myth-making. Allied and Allied-linked investigations treated Bormann as a high-priority target. Intelligence services, military police, and later Interpol notices circulated descriptions and requests for information. Governments and private investigators pursued leads across borders. Obstacles were numerous. The collapse of civil order in Germany, destroyed records, mass movements of displaced persons, and the deliberate use of false papers by fugitives. Additionally, the sheer volume of people on the move in 1945 produced a flood of unverified sightings that swamped investigators' capacity to follow each lead rigorously. Among the most persistent and problematic elements of the post-war record are the alleged sightings in Argentina and other South American countries. Some reports were intelligence leaks, others were press items or the statements of refugees who claimed to have encountered former Nazis abroad. These reports fed a growing narrative in the public imagination that senior Nazis had slipped away and were living under assumed identities. That narrative was true in some documented cases, but it should not be assumed true for every allegation. Each claim must be treated as unverified unless supported by documentation, travel records, asylum or citizenship files, corroborated eyewitness testimony with known provenance or forensic linkage. The story took a decisive turn decades after the war with the reported discovery of human remains. Skepticism and investigative persistence converged. Construction or archaeological work in an area associated with desperate fighting reportedly turned up bones and artifacts linked to the war's end. Contemporary accounts, and later official statements, credited those remains as possibly belonging to Bormann. Identification was said to be achieved through dental comparison, and later tests were reported to have used more modern techniques. At this point, the record becomes especially technical and must be handled with precision. Which remains, discovered when and where exactly, were compared to which dental records, under whose authority, and with what conclusions. Some secondary sources summarize that remains found near Lehrter Bahnhof in Berlin in the early 1970s were compared with Hitler's dental records or with Bormann's dentist's files and were identified as his. Other summaries say DNA testing in the 1990s confirmed the match. However, there are discrepancies in published accounts about dates, methods, and chain of custody. For these reasons, specific identification claims must be annotated with primary documentation. Source required. Exact discovery report. Location, date. Forensic lab reports. Court declarations. German Federal Archives files. If those forensic identifications are accepted, they shifted the legal status of Bormann from missing to deceased, allowing courts to close his case and historians to place a terminus on his life. Several governments and courts issued formal declarations of death at various times in the post-war era for multiple missing Nazis. The timing and legal effect of any specific declaration relating to Bormann should be cited precisely. If, conversely, forensic certainty was lacking or contested, then Bormann's disappearance remains an open historical question and a case study in how myth can fill documentary gaps. The difference between legal closure and public belief is crucial here. A court can declare a person legally dead on the balance of probability. Public memory can continue to cling to alternative scenarios. Why does this matter beyond satisfying curiosity? There are at least three broader implications. First, the fate of a high-level administrator of genocide and war matters to the historical record of accountability. Knowing whether Bormann died in Berlin or escaped to safety affects how we understand the post-war distribution of responsibility and impunity. Second, the saga demonstrates how chaotic retreats and bureaucratic collapse create fertile ground for rumors, and for formal rumors to be treated as intelligence. That dynamic complicates post-conflict justice. Third, the interplay between forensic science and archival research illustrates how modern tools can sometimes resolve old mysteries, but only where the chain of custody, documentation, and comparative records are preserved and accessible. There are counterpoints that must be acknowledged. First, not all identifications are incontestable. Dental comparisons rely on surviving records and on proper maintenance of chain of custody. DNA comparisons require uncontaminated samples and appropriate reference material. Second, even when scientific evidence exists, interpretation matters. A match to remains found at a particular site proves only that those remains belong to a person with the same dental characteristics or DNA profile, not the story of how he reached that place. Third, conspiracy and mythology feed each other. Ambiguous cases become magnets for claims that satisfy a desire for secret continuity, the idea that monsters survive to haunt the world. What does the preponderance of available evidence suggest? Based strictly on the closest contemporaneous accounts, Bormann appears to have left the bunker during the last breakout attempts and to have been seen trying to escape Berlin. Evidence from the immediate aftermath tends to support the view that he did not survive long after that attempt. Later forensic claims have, in several accounts, been presented as confirmation of death in Berlin, but those claims require precise sourcing and verification. Where the documentary trail is robust, witness statements, battlefield reports, forensic reports produced under proper evidentiary standards, historians can draw stronger conclusions. Where the trail is fragmentary, the responsible approach is to present hypotheses ranked by evidentiary weight and to mark unverified claims clearly as such. There is also the legal dimension. For many years after 1945, Bormann remained on wanted lists. Governments and international police agencies pursued leads for decades. At some point, legal systems had to close files, declare deaths for inheritance and administrative reasons, or maintain missing person statuses. The exact dates and nature of those legal actions must be documented, which court declared him dead, in which year, on what grounds, and whether that declaration rested on forensic identification or on the passage of time and lack of evidence. Source required: court records, German Federal Republic legal declarations, Interpol notices. Finally, we must consider the symbolic weight of the case. Martin Bormann's disappearance turned into a cultural touchstone, a cipher for the anxieties of survivors and the world about whether the structures that produced mass murder had been adequately dismantled or whether they had simply dispersed into new forms. Resolving his fate, or accepting that some questions will always retain an element of uncertainty, is not merely a matter of curiosity. It is part of how societies reckon with responsibility, memory, and the limits of evidence. So what is the bottom line we can stake with confidence, and what remains contested? Confident statements. Bormann was a central administrative figure in the Nazi hierarchy. He was present in Berlin in the final days. He disappeared from the public record as Berlin fell. In the years after the war, multiple sightings and reports circulated claiming he had escaped. Contested or unresolved statements, and these need direct documentary citation, include the exact circumstances and location of his death, the details of any forensic identification of remains attributed to him, and the legal dates of official declarations of death. Wherever specific dates, forensic methods, or court outcomes are cited, the script must link to the primary report or archival file. Indefinito, source required, list exact forensic reports, the discovery record for remains, court rulings, Interpol notices. There is one final sobering lesson from this case. The chaotic end of totalitarian systems produces both victims and blank spaces in the archive. Those blank spaces can be filled by diligent scholarship, forensic science, and careful access to records, or they can be filled by rumor, wishful thinking, and political narratives that serve other ends. The historian's task is not to provide tidy closure where the evidence does not support it, but to be transparent about degrees of certainty and to prioritize documentation over drama. If you want to follow this case further, the next step is archival. Consult the original bunker witness depositions, Allied intelligence files, German public prosecutor files regarding the discovery of remains, the forensic lab reports referenced in the 1970s and 1990s, and Interpol archives. Key archive locations to request include the U.S. National Archives, NARA, the German Federal Archives, Interpol historical records, and contemporary press files. For each major factual claim in any final cut of this story, insert a citation. The document or report that supports the claim. Source required. List to be compiled and attached. See end of script for placeholders. In closing, the question, what happened to Martin Bormann, does not have a single, uncomplicated answer expressed here as absolute fact. Instead, it offers a layered response. A well-documented chain of wartime testimony places him in Berlin's last hours and suggests he attempted to escape. Later forensic claims and official declarations have been presented as closure by some authorities, but those claims require careful sourcing to be definitive. What endures beyond the technicalities is the larger truth. The disappearance of a key administrator of a criminal regime became a test case for post-war justice, for the limits of evidence, and for the human appetite for certainty in the wake of catastrophe. If this investigation was useful to you, watch our video on the fates of other top Nazis next, and check the description for sources and further reading. Sources and further reading. Placeholders. Each item below requires insertion of primary citations and archival references. 1. Source required. Contemporary bunker witness depositions and diaries. Specify files and repository. 2. Source required. Allied intelligence summaries and wanted notices. NARA, British National Archives references. 3. Source required reports of remains discovered near Lerter Bahnhof or other specified site. Discovery report, 1972 excavation file, police file. 4. Source required forensic lab reports, dental comparison reports, date, lab, examiner, any later DNA reports, laboratory, date, method. 5. Source required, court rulings or legal declarations of death. German Federal Republic records. Specify court, case number, date. 6. Secondary historiography, major academic works on Bormann and on post-war Nazi fugitives, to be enumerated with full bibliographic details. 7. Interpol and International Police archives on post-war Nazi fugitive investigations. Note on methodology. Throughout the script, claims labeled reported, unconfirmed, indefinito, or with source required, indicate where primary documentation must be cited before any definitive statement is broadcast as factual. This is a case where the documentary record determines the story, and where transparency about the limits of our evidence is part of responsible historical journalism.